It's hard to imagine a world without any form of authority. No governments, no laws, no institutions to turn to when wronged. A place where survival depends not on justice, but on power. And trust is a dangerous illusion. For Thomas Hobbes, this wasn't a distant fiction. He lived through the brutal collapse of political order during the English Civil War, and what he witnessed shaped his darkest, most provocative idea, that without a strong central authority, human life reverts to chaos. What he called the state of nature wasn't an idyllic return to some innocent past. It was a terrifying void where everyone feared everyone else. In this world, every person becomes a potential enemy. Every resource is something to be fought over, and every moment is haunted by the fear of sudden death. Hobbes wasn't exaggerating for effect. He was revealing what he believed to be the raw, unfiltered truth about humanity in the absence of structure. In Hobbes's eyes, the state of nature wasn't just violent, it was inevitable. Left to our own devices, with no common authority to restrain us, we fall into what he called the war of all against all. It's not that humans are evil in some moral sense. Rather, we're driven by self-preservation, by the constant anxiety that others might harm us first. So we strike preemptively. We lie, betray, manipulate, because if we don't, someone else will. Hobbes famously described this condition with chilling clarity. The life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And he meant it. This wasn't rhetoric. This was his diagnosis of what happens when fear replaces trust and when survival overrides morality. In this vision, morality itself becomes a luxury, something that only emerges after security is guaranteed. Until then, fear rules everything. But Hobbes wasn't simply offering a dark fable. He was making a claim about human nature that still resonates today. He argued that we are not naturally cooperative or peaceful. We don't come together out of love. We come together out of necessity. Civilization, then, is not the flowering of our best qualities, but a fragile agreement born of mutual fear. When that agreement breaks, when the social contract collapses, we don't descend into chaos. We return to it. And history offers too many examples that echo this idea. In times of war, revolution, or disaster, the thin veil of order is quickly torn apart. People hoard, people panic, people turn on each other. Hobbes saw this not as an exception, but as a natural reversion, a glimpse of what lies beneath our polished systems and polite societies. What scared him wasn't just the violence, but how quickly we accept it when fear takes hold. So Hobbes asks us to reconsider what we think of as freedom. In the state of nature, you are free. But that freedom is a curse. You are free to kill and to be killed. Free to take what you want, but never safe enough to enjoy it. Hobbes challenges the romantic notion that human beings flourish without restraint. He shows us a darker mirror, that without order, freedom becomes insecurity, and insecurity breeds conflict. It's this insight that sets the stage for everything that follows in Hobbes's political philosophy. The need for structure, the longing for peace, and the terrifying cost of liberty when it exists without limits. The state of nature is not just a past we've escaped. It's a threat that lives beneath the surface of every society, waiting, watching, ready to rise again whenever the Leviathan sleeps. If fear is the origin of chaos, then paradoxically, it can also be the seed of order. This is where Hobbes makes a bold and unsettling move. Rather than trying to remove fear from the equation, he uses it, weaponizes it even, to construct his vision of political stability. From the ruins of the state of nature, he imagines a new creature rising, the Leviathan. Not a mythological monster to be feared from afar, but a collective being born from the will of the people themselves. A sovereign entity formed through a contract, one in which each individual agrees to surrender their natural freedoms in exchange for protection. Not partial protection, not conditional peace, but absolute security, guaranteed by an absolute power. For Hobbes, this was the only way to escape the endless spiral of violence. The Leviathan was not a tyrant imposed from above, but a reflection of human desperation, a mirror held up to the deepest part of our need to survive. The genius of Hobbes lies in this transformation, turning fear into a foundation. What others saw as a weakness, he turned into political architecture. People, according to him, would only agree to live together if they feared the alternative more than they resented authority. So, they create a sovereign, a singular, undivided power that becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This sovereign isn't just a ruler, it's a construct of collective will, a fiction so powerful it becomes real. Through this contract, individuals become subjects not out of love or loyalty, but out of necessity. They give up the right to judge, punish, and defend themselves, and transfer those rights to the Leviathan. And in return, the Leviathan gives them what no human being can promise alone: peace. But that peace has a price. It demands obedience. It demands that you accept being ruled, that you submit. For Hobbes, this was not a tragedy, it was salvation. This concept revolutionized political philosophy. Hobbes wasn't just proposing a system of government, he was redefining the relationship between individuals and power. Before him, many believed authority had to be justified by divine right or moral virtue. Hobbes swept that aside. To him, the legitimacy of power came not from God or justice, but from fear itself, from the silent, desperate agreement of people who preferred chains to knives. That insight cuts deep into the heart of what we consider civilization. It tells us that law is not born from some higher truth, but from our terror of what happens without it. And so the Leviathan becomes more than a king or a state. It becomes a psychological necessity, an embodiment of our willingness to trade freedom for the promise of not being killed in our sleep. In this way, Hobbes offers not hope, but clarity. And clarity, even when it's cold, has a strange kind of comfort. Still, the Leviathan is not a hero. It's not meant to be admired. It is a terrifying idea, and Hobbes knew that. But he believed the true terror was the alternative. Without the Leviathan, life collapses into suspicion, betrayal, and war. With it, we gain structure, institutions, civilization. But we lose something too. We lose the freedom to resist, to redefine the rules, to escape control. The Leviathan may protect us, but it also watches us. It keeps us safe, but only as long as we obey. In that tension, Hobbes sketches the outline of the modern world. A world where power is necessary but never innocent, where fear builds nations and order is always bought with something dear. And perhaps the most haunting part is that Hobbes doesn't offer an escape, only a choice. Live in freedom and die in chaos, or live in order and surrender a part of yourself. In that dilemma, the Leviathan is born, not as a monster, but as a compromise we all make, whether we admit it or not. At the core of Hobbes's philosophy lies a painful paradox. In order to be safe, we must stop being entirely free. It sounds simple, even logical. But when we pause and truly feel the weight of that trade-off, it becomes clear that we're dealing with one of the deepest tensions of the human condition. The freedom to speak, move, resist, question, to live without oversight, is intoxicating. But freedom also opens the door to uncertainty, danger, and collapse. On the other hand, security brings comfort and structure, but it demands something in return: compliance. The more we value order, the more we must allow ourselves to be observed, regulated, controlled. This is not just a philosophical concern. It's a reality that unfolds every day in the systems we live under. Surveillance cameras, national security policies, social media monitoring, digital footprints, each a quiet reminder of the deal we've made. A deal Hobbes warned us about centuries ago, but one we still don't fully understand. What Hobbes captured so vividly is that people don't give up their freedom lightly. They do it because they're afraid. And today, fear hasn't disappeared. It's only changed its form. We no longer fear civil war in the same way Hobbes did, but we fear other things: terrorism, crime, pandemics, economic collapse, social instability. And in the face of that fear, we find ourselves willing, sometimes even eager, to accept limits on our freedom. We install tracking apps to feel safe. We accept surveillance in airports, public spaces, even our own devices, because it gives us the illusion of control. The state, in many ways, has become an updated Leviathan, not as visible, not as central, but just as present. And while it rarely uses brute force, it still demands obedience. The real genius of modern control is that it no longer needs to threaten us. It just needs to make us feel afraid enough to agree. This is the modern dilemma. How much freedom are we truly willing to sacrifice for the promise of safety? And more importantly, do we even notice when we're making that sacrifice? Hobbes believed people would make that decision consciously. Today, many of us make it passively. We scroll through terms of service without reading. We accept facial recognition in exchange for faster access. We share intimate data for convenience. And each time, the line between freedom and control becomes blurrier. The Leviathan doesn't knock at the door anymore. It's already inside the house. And this shift is psychological as much as political. The more we get used to being watched, the less we resist. The more we rely on the system, the more powerless we feel to question it. And eventually, the idea of true freedom starts to feel not only dangerous, but absurd. So where does that leave us? Hobbes would say we've made the only rational choice. That peace is worth the cost. But we're left to ask, is this really peace, or just a different kind of fear? Are we truly safe, or simply more comfortable in our submission? The question isn't whether Hobbes was right. It's whether we even realize how much of our world is still built on his logic. When we lock our doors at night, when we install security systems, when we tolerate censorship for the greater good, we're echoing the same fear that birthed the Leviathan. And perhaps the most haunting thought is this: maybe Hobbes didn't describe a historical moment. Maybe he uncovered something permanent in us, a wound that never fully heals, a tension that never disappears. And the longer we ignore it, the deeper it grows beneath the surface of our modern lives. There's something deeply unsettling about Hobbes's Leviathan, even if it's logically convincing. The idea of surrendering all personal power to a sovereign entity might bring peace, but it also opens the door to something else, something darker. If we give all authority to one figure or system, who watches that power? What prevents it from turning against us? Hobbes believed that the risk of tyranny was less dangerous than the certainty of chaos. But many thinkers after him weren't so sure. John Locke, for instance, saw danger not just in disorder, but in absolute rule. He argued that when a sovereign has unchecked control, it stops serving the people and starts controlling them. Freedom, in Locke's view, wasn't something to be sacrificed for peace. It was the very condition that made peace worth having. And so, a major philosophical divide was born. Is safety more important than liberty? Or does liberty define what safety really means? The Leviathan, in its absolute form, is built on a kind of pessimism, on the belief that humans are too selfish, too violent, too unpredictable to govern themselves. But what if that's not the whole story? Rousseau, for example, rejected Hobbes' grim view of human nature. He believed that humans are corrupted not by their instincts, but by their institutions. For Rousseau, the problem wasn't the lack of authority. It was the presence of the wrong kind. The Leviathan, he feared, replaced natural freedom with artificial order. It didn't cure the disease. It merely changed its symptoms. Instead of violence between individuals, you now had violence institutionalized, legalized through law and enforcement. And this, he argued, was just as dehumanizing. By surrendering ourselves to a sovereign, we risk losing not only our rights, but our sense of moral agency. We stop asking whether laws are just and simply assume they must be obeyed. The danger, then, isn't just theoretical. History offers countless reminders of what happens when power is centralized without accountability. Dictatorships, police states, regimes that begin with promises of safety and end in oppression. Hobbes might say those are distortions of the Leviathan, not its true form. But the line between a necessary sovereign and a dangerous tyrant is often only visible in hindsight. Once a people have handed over their autonomy, it becomes very difficult to take it back, especially when the very force that protects them is also the one they fear. Hobbes underestimated how deeply human beings crave not just order, but dignity. We want to feel safe, yes, but also heard, also respected. The Leviathan, in its pure form, has no interest in listening. Its task is to control, not to empathize. And for many philosophers, that makes it not a solution, but a new kind of problem. More orderly, perhaps, but no less destructive. Even today, echoes of this debate remain alive. Governments around the world justify sweeping powers in the name of security. Mass surveillance, censorship, the erosion of civil liberties, often dressed up as temporary measures, often accepted by a population too exhausted to resist. The irony is painful. In trying to escape fear, we sometimes run straight into its arms. Hobbes offered a mirror to our darkest impulses, but his critics ask whether we should build a society based on fear at all. Should fear be the architect of our politics? Or should it be resisted, challenged, kept in check by principles stronger than the instinct to survive? The Leviathan may be necessary in moments of collapse, but if we make it permanent, we risk turning emergency into norm and losing ourselves in the process. The question, then, isn't just about power. It's about trust, not in authority, but in ourselves. And whether we believe human beings are capable of more than just obedience. To understand Hobbes is to understand the political power of fear, not fear as a passing feeling, but as a structure, an organizing principle. Hobbes didn't just believe that fear motivates action. He believed it defines civilization. In his view, fear is the invisible architect behind every law, every contract, every government. It is not love for justice that binds society. It's terror at what would happen without it. That might sound bleak, but for Hobbes, it was honest. He had seen what human beings were capable of when left to themselves. Betrayal, cruelty, self-interest disguised as morality. And so, instead of denying that darkness, he built his political philosophy around it. For him, fear wasn't a flaw in human nature. It was the glue that holds us together. The one emotion strong enough to make people submit, cooperate, and obey. And in that submission, he saw the birth of peace. But what does it mean to build a society on fear? It means that our sense of security is never unconditional. It's always earned through obedience. The fear of punishment, the fear of chaos, the fear of the other. These are the forces that keep us in line. And over time, they become so deeply embedded in our institutions that we stop noticing them. We call them laws, protocols, customs. But underneath them, there is always the threat of what happens if we disobey. Hobbes believed this threat was necessary, that without it, society would unravel. But that view leaves little room for trust or for hope. It assumes that people cannot be relied upon to act justly unless they are afraid. And maybe that's true. But if so, what does it say about the kind of world we've created? About the kind of people we've become? Fear may keep us alive, but can it ever teach us how to live? This question is more urgent now than ever. We live in a time where fear is a constant undercurrent. In politics, in media, in personal relationships. We're told to fear the economy, the climate, the other political party, the stranger, the system, even ourselves. And each time we act out of fear, we reinforce the logic of Hobbes. We accept restrictions. We stay silent. We look the other way when power overreaches. Because the alternative, uncertainty, feels worse. In this sense, the Leviathan never disappeared. It evolved. It no longer wears a crown. It lives in algorithms, laws, social contracts we've long forgotten how to question. Hobbes might see this and say, yes, this is how it must be. But we have to ask, are we still making that choice consciously? Or have we simply internalized the fear so deeply that it no longer feels like fear at all? Just reality? Perhaps the most haunting insight Hobbes offers is that peace can be built on fear, and that many will accept that bargain without hesitation. But peace built on fear is not the same as peace built on understanding or mutual respect. It is quieter, yes, but it is also colder. Hobbes gives us a world where survival is everything and morality is secondary, where the social contract is not a celebration of unity, but a truce between enemies. And maybe that's the world we needed in a time of civil war. But is it still the world we want now? Or are we capable of imagining something more? A politics not driven by fear of what we might become, but by hope in what we could be? Hobbes forces us to confront the shadows at the heart of civilization. He doesn't offer escape, only clarity. And maybe that clarity is what we need most, to see the foundations of our world for what they are, and then decide, consciously, courageously, whether we want to keep living under them. Perhaps the greatest strength of Hobbes's philosophy lies not in his answers, but in the brutal honesty of his questions. He did not try to gild the human condition. He did not write to console, but to reveal. And what he revealed was disturbing. That behind the most civilized institutions, there is fear. That behind our ideas of progress and order, there is a shadow. The fear of returning to chaos, violence, war of all against all. We build our cities, our political systems, our social rules as walls against this darkness. And we call these walls civilization. But what happens when we start living just to keep those walls up? When all our political efforts are reduced to avoiding collapse, avoiding the other, avoiding risk? This is where Hobbes's vision ceases to be an analysis and becomes a mirror that forces us to ask, are we really living, or just protecting ourselves from the worst? Leviathan is not just a creature of the past. He still breathes among us, silent, omnipresent, sometimes in the state, sometimes in our minds. And the most dangerous thing is not that it exists. It's just that little by little we start to see it as normal, as needed, as inevitable. But maybe it isn't. Perhaps we are more ready than we think to imagine a new way of living together, one that does not need to be built on fear, but on trust, responsibility, dialogue. This takes courage. It requires believing that human beings are capable of more than just obeying to survive. It requires a kind of faith that Hobbes may never have had, but that we may need to cultivate. Because in the end, the real challenge is not defeating Leviathan. It's recognizing when it stopped being an answer and became a prison. And now it's up to you to look around and within yourself and ask, who are you in this contract? A conscious citizen? An obedient servant? Or someone who still believes that freedom, even if fragile, is still worth the risk?